Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Stam Audio. Stam Audio creates zero-compromise recording gear that is light on the wallet. Only the best components are used, and each one goes through a rigorous testing process with one thing in mind, getting the best sound possible. Go to stamaudio.com for more info. And now your hosts, Joey Sturgis, Joel Wanasek, and Eyal Levi.
Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast. I am Eyal Levi. Joey and Joel are not with me today because they are traveling. Instead of them, I've got someone way cooler anyway. So I've got one of my, I'd say, most formative heroes, Mr. Gene Hoglan. Thank you for being here.
Eyal, it's a pleasure to be here, man. I got to admit, I'm a big fan of yours, man.
Oh, really?
I dug Doth tons and liked all your work, and I know we've done some touring together, and that was a great time, so I'm a big fan as well.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. I wasn't sure if you remembered the touring or not with us, because it was a few years ago. But
absolutely.
All right, so I have a question about that, about the Fear Factory tour in Europe. Did you guys get stranded at the end?
Stranded? Yes. Some of us did. I remember there was a huge, what was that?
It was a snowstorm.
Huge, blizzard of all blizzards over there in England, and we ran like hell over to Heathrow, and then we got the turn back there. Some of the crew made it on their flights, and that's good. But I think a few band members got left behind for 4 or 5 days, and I remember we had to drive to Paris, de Gaulle Airport, and got 5 minutes before we're boarding that plane, Paris decided to have some kind of a luggage handler strike, one of those like hour-long strikes. And so we're like, oh, man, we've come all this way. And then we ended up getting home or flying into LAX. We landed at about midnight on Christmas morning, essentially, and I had a 2-hour drive home to San Diego. They didn't get me a flight home to San Diego, so I had to drive there, and then I ended up getting a flat tire on the way home. First one I'd had in years, and then
amazing. I
ended up pulling into my place at about 5:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, and I remember my lady and myself, we were hosting a big Christmas dinner for the entire family, and so slept for about an hour and got up and started cooking turkey or something.
Well, just for people who aren't aware of what happened, basically Doth was on tour with High on Fire and Fear Factory. You were playing with Fear Factory, and this was winter of 2010, and it was very bad weather-wise, but I guess there was this one snowstorm that took out all the airports, or a lot of the airports, and Heathrow got hit especially hard. And it was like literally on the day that the tour was ending, or the day before. So basically, I think 200,000 people got stranded.
Holy moly.
Oh, yeah. They put us in a refugee tent for...
Refugee tent? Holy.
Yeah, dude. We got to Heathrow, and there was like a tent city set up, and they gave us the foil blankets.
Oh, my gosh. So you guys were essentially like sleeping outside in a tent?
Yeah, well, yeah. And they had cots and everything.
Oh, that is psychotic.
Yeah, I have pictures of it. I'll actually post pictures in the show notes for anyone that's curious. But yeah, so we got the foil blankets. Normal people were flipping out on each other. It was one of those. I always think about this like when there's a gas shortage or something, and you see normal people just like going crazy in the gas lines, fighting each other. It was kind of one of those deals.
Or a zombie apocalypse or something.
Yeah,
could happen.
and you will see people. You will see people definitely regress.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that was crazy. We were fortunate enough. We got placed in. There was a hotel down the way, and so we stayed for 4 or 5 days in this hotel. So gosh, it sure sounds like we got a better shake than you guys did. That's terrible.
Well, the part that was funny about that was, I guess we got so desperate being there that one flight opened up and we just got on it no matter where it was going.
Yeah, sure.
And we ended up in Canada.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, rather than Atlanta. So somehow we got to Canada and we had to explain what was happening. Eventually we rented a van to cross the border to go to Detroit airport.
Sure.
Man, it was just a mess. But
man, that sounds like a mess.
let's talk music.
Alrighty.
One thing, and I've actually wanted to ask you this before. It was one of the things that if I ever had the chance to ask you, I would. So I have the chance, and I'm going to. Back in the day when I discovered you, that was on Individual Thought Patterns, and I was maybe 14 or 13. And I was first starting to get into metal, or maybe I was like a year into it, and I kind of thought I knew what metal drums were supposed to be, and then I heard that, and your playing was so different. It was, I mean, technically it was incredible, but it was so different. It had so much of a groove that I didn't hear in that style before. I wasn't familiar with Sean Reinert's work at that point.
Fair enough, yeah.
So it was my introduction to like stuff, to metal drumming that wasn't just, I guess, double bass, wasn't just like thrash beats. It was pulling from many different places. And I saw that in your new DVD, Atomic Clock 2, you talk about how you're not afraid to incorporate outside influences. And I just wanted to hear more about that. Where those influences come from, and how you actually go about incorporating them into your style.
Well, I know that well, thank you very much. That's very cool. I know that around the Individual Thought Patterns era, I was, I had obviously grown up listening to a lot of Neil Peart, and for about 4 or 5 years prior to Individual, I had gotten so into Al Di Meola, and especially like the Steve Gadd era of Al Di Meola, and his playing was just so tasty, and it was like Neil Peart. It was very gettable. It was very understandable. You could work out what he's playing, and some of it was technical, but you're like, hey, it's not so technical that I can't figure that out, like a Dave Weckl or a Terry Bozzio ostinato pattern or something. But
yeah, it's still music.
It was, and Steve Gadd he laid everything down so tasty, such a groove, such feel to his playing, and he was kind of the guy that introduced me to the beat that is called a bembe beat. And it's kind of it's essentially just kind of a shuffly paradiddle, really. But you can play that all over the kind of 6/8 feel. It's kind of don't. That was such an amazing beat. It's like that beat is directly from an Al Di Meola song called Casino, and when Chuck and I were rehearsing the record, we put Individual together in about 3 weeks from me arriving in Florida to tracking it. And, that was just a kind of an approach that I wanted to do, because Death was pretty well known for songs like Leprosy, where they have the, the kick drums are just kind of doing the little double bass thing, and the snares landing where it lands. And I just thought, well, hey, why don't you try, applying that bembe beat to it? And then you can kind of use that as a jumping off point to start trying it with double rides and try it with double hi-hat. And I started, the bembe beat has a certain pulse to it, and you can kind of take the hand portion of that pulse and apply it to when you're just cruising with nonstop alternating kicks on the feet. And, it makes kind of a tasty little flavor. And there's licks on there that I could point out. Well, I got this from, I got this lick in Individual Thought Patterns from, like YYZ from Rush or whatever, and things like that. So Chuck was very open to, all of our ideas, mine, Stevie D's, and he was always very, very gracious, very accommodating about like, hey, yeah, I can play my riffs over what you're playing. I'm locking into everything. So go sick, go nuts, be creative, be you. And that was really refreshing, and I admit that when I got the call from Chuck and we were, talking about getting together, I was kind of under the, after hearing Human, and yes, Human had definitely some progressive jazz fusion tendencies from Sean Reinert, amazing drums on that album, a real template setter, I thought. I kind of thought that maybe Chuck and I were going to write this most psychotic death metal opus of all time. And when I got what I've referred to for years as the adorable little riff tape that he sent, I was like, whoa, I was taken aback, man. I was like, wait a minute, there's like no death metal on this thing. You know, a lot of the riffs were really high up on the neck, and you know, I play a lot of guitar, and I was able to figure out the riffs a lot of them anyway. And so, you know, when I got together with Chuck, I've mentioned this before, that we got together on the very first night, you know, stopped off, had dinner at a restaurant, went back to his place, and I said, hey, Chuck, let's whip out some guitars, show me these riffs, because it'll help me like solidify what I'm doing on the drums. And he's showing me the riffs, and I'm like, hey, why don't we try, you know, dropping some of these riffs down the neck or up the neck, whatever you guitarists call it, and you know, let's get him in the lower registers. He's like, wow, I never even thought of that. Cool idea. So having the riffs in my hands as well really helped kind of solidify where certain pulse points should be and certain accents should be, and because there was a lot on that adorable little riff tape that I couldn't quite make out. I knew essentially what he was doing, but you know, having the guitar in both of our hands was a real help in that. And so my influences just absolutely ranged all over the place on that record, totally.
Well, you know, so this podcast normally, I'd say 85% of the time or 80% of the time, we focus on producers and production. And every once in a while, we bring in musicians that we think have something to say, or, you know, maybe someone who's been on the business end of it, who has great stuff to share. But one thing that we always tell the producer guys is learn as many instruments as you can, because you're not going to be able to communicate with the musicians quite the same as having actually played that instrument. So for instance, yeah, I took drum lessons for 6 months, even though I'm definitely not a drummer, voice lessons. And so hearing you right now say that you learned the riffs on guitar, that explains so much to me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that definitely helps me understand how those drums were that musical. How many instruments do you play? I
tend to play the stringed instruments, and you know, besides drums, and you know, I play guitar. I've played guitar on many a Dark Angel record and that sort of thing. That's me playing guitar on a lot of that, and that was me, you know, when I was learning guitar. But, you know, I play bass. I've played guitar and bass on later records and stuff. It's like whatever gets the job done, really. But that's one thing that's the reason why I learned how to play guitar, because it's like I wanted to play drums. I never wanted to be a guitarist in a band. I wanted to be the drummer. But I always thought, well, you know, you are going to be able to communicate your idea way better if you could directly show it to your guitarist. You can communicate to all your other musicians in your band. You know, I sing a lot too. I wrote like pretty much the majority of the vocal lines on like Time Does Not Heal, for instance, from Dark Angel. And I've just, if you can communicate, and you know, it's kind of like Occam's razor. You know, the simplest way to communicate is you show them the riff rather than doing the Lars Ulrich style of hum the riff to the guy, and he's going to try to figure out what you're humming. And no, you don't have that third note right. You know, it's like, here, let me just show you. So that's kind of why I got stuck playing guitar on a lot of these Dark Angel records, because a lot of my guitarists were just like, you play that, you know, like you track it, we'll learn it, but it's going to take us a while to learn that. So I have noticed, and you know, and these days there are so many drummers who are guitarists. There are so many drummers that, and especially in the heavier styles of music, is I can listen to, I'm getting pretty good at being able to pick out albums or bands or songs where, hey, the drummer writes all this stuff. I can tell, because this is not a guitarist's approach. I can tell this is a drummer's approach. And sometimes I'm able to talk to the drummer of the band, and I'll ask, hey, did you write this album? And he's like, yeah, I did. I was like, I knew it, you know, so stuff like that. So, you know, it's helpful, definitely. Learn the other instruments, and you can communicate very easily.
Well, on the topic of communication, with a career like yours that's been as long as it is, and in as many different bands that you've either been in or done sessions for, that would have been impossible unless your communication game was on point.
Fair enough.
I don't see how it could work unless you really know how to communicate. I just don't. I don't see any other way. So I'm wondering, like, say a situation like Opeth in 2005, where you guys are on tour and shit happens with the drummer.
Sure. And
they need somebody. And I only know about that because I happened to be backstage at that show.
Wow.
So, yeah, a strange little bit of trivia because I guess Mike was recording his parts for Roadrunner United at my house.
Okay.
And, like, literally on the day that their drummer kind of made some decisions. And
yeah.
And you took over. But didn't you learn that in, like, a day?
It was like, I don't know, 4 hours, 6 hours, something like that. I recall the first show being in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I walked into catering that like about noon. That was about the time I woke up at that time, and I walked in. I saw all the Opeth guys looking all really glum and just all dejected. And I sat down at their table, like, "What's going on, guys? What's happening?" And they explained that we've lost Martin. We have a show in like 4 hours, 6 hours. I remember it was a revolving headlining act sort of thing. So
Sounds of the Underground.
Sounds of the Underground, yeah. And like some days they would be the late headliner, sometimes they would be the early headliner, and other headliners after them, sort of thing. I think Lamb of God was on that, Unearthed, but Chimera, I think, was one of the other kind of revolving headliners. And at this day, Opeth was one of the earlier scheduled headliners. So we had until about 4 o'clock, or maybe perhaps 6 o'clock or something. And I think they had said, "Hey, I don't suppose you'd want to take a crack at this, would you?" And I was like, "Sure, let's try it. Let's give it a shot." So I remember we set up Martin's drums for that, and I played Martin's drums for that gig. And he's got a pretty, a rather differing setup than mine. So I think we went back to my drums for all the subsequent shows, but. Yeah, it was. We sat in the back of the Opeth tour bus, and I just kind of pounded on a pillow, and I got the discs from the guys, and I just, it was a 4-song set. It was a rather short set, 40-minute set or something, but that's 4 10-minute songs there, and it was. I'm always up for challenges. And plus, if I could help my friends out, just by playing drums for them, yeah, sure, no problem. So, I ended up playing about 17 shows on that tour with them, and it was great. I love Opeth, and so that was a pretty fantastic tour. And, I love strapping too, so I got to play with 2 of my favorite bands on the same day. Ooh, that's super, super bonus for me.
Yeah, sounds pretty cool. When approaching the material and talking to them about it, did you guys have to discuss a lot of it, or was it just, here's the music, good luck? It
was essentially, here's the music. I think Michael, he sat with the guitar and we were like going through the entire song. Like I listened to the music for a couple of hours, and I had played one song with them, actually 2 songs with them previously on one night in Vancouver when they ran into a similar situation with Martin. Martin wasn't present on this tour, and he was a last-minute no-show on his part, so they had their drum tech playing the easiest songs he could play, which were their ballads. So when they had come to Vancouver about a year earlier, I'd gotten the call the night before, "Hey, can you learn pick a song, please learn it, and come down and play it with us." And I remember calling Devin, because I wasn't that familiar with Opeth at the time. I called Devin and said, "Hey, what's a good song to play?" He's like, "Do the Drapery Falls." And I was like, "Is that the one that I've heard you play before?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, I'll play that one." So, and since then I had gotten into Opeth, and I just remember I watched every one of their shows. I think it was like they played about 10 shows with Martin, and I caught every single minute of every show. So, it's if I get the chance to hear songs, get them in my head, then that's where the mentality of drums are 90% mental, 10% physical. If you have them in your brain, chances are you're going to have them in your hands as well. And the one thing that I was noticing a lot was when I was actually breaking the songs down, listening to them in the emergency situation, I'm like, okay, I know a fill's about to come in here. I guess I'm going to play this. And Martin plays exactly the fill I'm thinking of. And I remember having a conversation with him a few days before he'd left the tour, and he had said that, he listened to the Individual Thought Patterns album a lot, and I was quite the influence. And so having that sort of mindset and kind of the Latin mindset towards a lot of his approaches, it made it way easier than if it was just like some crazy math metal or something that I had to really figure out. It was just, there was such a natural groove, and it's like Martin on his recordings was laying down licks that as I'm listening to him, essentially, breaking them down for the first time, I'm like, okay, well, hey, he's playing the stuff I would play, so that makes it 10 times easier. So it was a challenge. I'm always up for challenges, but there were certain roadblocks that were not present that made it an even smoother situation.
So that's interesting that it sounds like your knowledge of other styles or you having other influences allowed you to pick it up a lot faster. I
would suppose that's a help, but also having an interest in their music and having an interest in them as people, it's like, these, because it's like if they don't figure out this situation, pretty much, staring at the watch in the next few hours, they're gonna have to go home. And it's like, hey, let's have that not happen. It's easy enough to do. So, let's just do it and make it happen. And I've had to do situations that are very similar later on in my career. I've done the same thing with Anthrax, essentially on tour with Testament and Anthrax. And Charlie had to leave the tour, and he approached me about, hey man, can you take over for me? I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. Let's make it happen. I've got 3 days to learn this material. Piece of cake,
I remember bumping into you in 2009. You rescued on an Earth tour.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, 2007.
Well, 2007. Yeah, you're right.
That's right.
I had just toured with them in Europe, and then I guess they had a blowout with their drummer or whatever.
I guess so, yeah.
And then you came and saved the tour. I remember that.
That was another interesting situation. I was on my way from LA up to Vancouver, where I was living, Vancouver, Canada, and I was going back up there to do edits on my DVD at the time, my first DVD, and I got a phone call from Unearth's management saying, hey, had a situation with the drummer last night in Canada, and they've got the night off tonight, but they're playing tomorrow night in Vancouver. Can you swing in and can we get together and you play this show? I'm like, I'm willing to do it, but I'm only in Oregon right now, or I'm at the kind of the Northern California area, about to enter Oregon. And they said, okay, give us a minute. If you're into it, cool, give us a minute. And they called me back a few minutes later and they said, what town are you near? And I said, I think I'm near Salem. And they said, okay, we assume that. So we have called a Best Buy in Salem. Will you please stop by that Best Buy and pick up these 2 latest Unearth records and, just learn them overnight? And I was like, okay, great. I've got about another 10 hours of driving to go from here. So sure, no problem. I'll stop in and I'll, just give me the track listing that you guys want, and I'll check out the songs. And so I did overnight. And then, we got together for a very brief rehearsal that afternoon, and then later that night we were playing a show, and I jumped on the tour that was another 3 weeks or so of playing with them, and that was great.
How you just said maybe 5 minutes ago that it's 90% mental. There was a friend of my dad's who was a jazz drummer. His name was Harry Blazer, I believe, and he played for like Tina Turner and Paul Anka, and then also would do these big jazz tours. And he was one of those dudes who's just phenomenal. And I remember asking him at one point, do you practice anymore? And he said, no, I don't practice. I just visualize.
Yes.
So you agree with that?
I agree with that big time, yeah. And I didn't even know that it was called visualization until about a month ago, and my lady was explaining, no, that's what you have been doing your whole career. It's visualization. And I'm like, oh, is that what that is? I just thought I run over a song in my head a bunch, and I'm kind of in my head playing the drums in my head and putting all the little parts where they got to go in my head. And she's like, that's visualization. So it's like, okay, cool. But yeah, that is essentially what I do. And that's, it's, if your mental chops are sharp, your physical chops, even if you've taken a month off or however long it takes for your chops to degrade, your chops come back pretty quickly. But as long as you got the mental grasp of the material that you're playing, then, first time you sit on a kit, no problem, like for instance, on this last little, we just did the 70,000 tons of metal cruise a couple of weeks ago, and they had the big all-star jam and stuff, and it was a matter of jumping on stage and playing Hammer Smashed Face by Cannibal Corpse.
Yes.
And, I never worked it out beforehand. I listened to it a few times. I got it in my head, and, we worked it out directly on stage, and it wasn't without its butchery, but and then the same thing went with Metal Militia from Metallica. Had to do that one with a bunch of guys. There was no rehearsal, there was no sound check or anything. So it's like, everybody looks at each other. It's like, okay, go follow me. I'm the conductor on this train, and I'll try to keep everything within a tempo everybody's comfortable with. So let's hit it.
So when you visualize stuff, do you actually do you imagine yourself from Gene point of view playing the drums? Like, how does it work in your head, if you could describe it?
I think so. I would imagine that if I'm doing it with my little invisible air, mental air drum kit, it's a lot of that. But what I do is I tap my fingers a lot. I'm always tapping my middle finger to my thumb on both hands, and that's how I'm working out parts. And I'm doing it right now. Probably shouldn't do that because I'm probably tapping on the mic. But and I also do the same thing with my toes. I got my big toes, and I'll just be playing the patterns on my toes. And my lady has walked in on me many times. I'm just here lying on the bed, eyes closed, hands folded across the chest, just tapping away with my fingers and my toes. And I've had roommates walk in on me. It's like, oh yeah, Gene's learning songs. That's what's happening. But yeah, I guess I've got the Gene point of view of the drum kit, and then just tapping away on the fingers and toes to work out the parts.
A very, very incredible violinist. She was the concert master for the Atlanta Symphony for 20 years. She told me that before she would do a solo, meaning learn a solo concerto or something.
Sure.
Before she knew that she was ready, she would play it from start to finish in her head.
Absolutely.
And if she fucked up, then she knew she wasn't ready. But she said that you're only ready when you can play it in your head without screwing up.
I agree with that. Absolutely. And that's, that is the way I practice that. Absolutely. Word for word, note for note on that. Yeah, totally. You get a song in your head, and I don't read music. I don't write music. So it is just a matter of learning it by rote, I suppose. And it's, you get that song in your head, and then when you can walk away from the iPod or the Discman or the iPhone or whatever and put everything down and then get through the song in your mind, then yeah, you've got it. So, and then for me, it's like I need to do that repeatedly. If I do that once, it's like, okay, that's once. But you got to do this, get it 3 times right now, especially if it's say a long song or something. Really solidify that in your head, and then okay, I'm good to have a crack on it. And that's why planes come in handy, when you're flying. Geez, I when I started touring with Testament, I had to take over for John Tempesta, who had to leave the tour to go do some work with The Cult, who he was also jamming with. And directly prior to the tour, I flew in from a recording session, and it was like a 2-3 hour flight to I think it was Dallas where I started with Testament, and I didn't have any time to prepare beforehand, so it was a matter of having a Discman or maybe my iPhone or something. I probably had an iPhone at the time. Just checking out the songs on iTunes or something all the way to the gig, and here's your one song you get to sound check with, and it's a 19-song set, so hey, at least I got to play one song in sound check. That was helpful, but it was an on-stage rehearsal that first night, and if you're prepared, you can pull it off. And I've always said it's just drums. It ain't brain surgery. It's music. If you make a mistake, it's gonna be okay. Like, don't it's not life and death. So just to have some fun with it, and take all the pressure off yourself. If you play 95% of it well, and then 5%, two little parts somewhere you didn't quite get, that's okay. Probably nobody notices other than the band or yourself. So I never really get down on myself if I make a mental error on stage or anything like that. I'm pretty easy going that way. I can usually let them go and not let it fester. It's like, hey, get it next time. Just just be good and get it next time. So
have you always had that attitude of being easy on yourself?
In terms of music, that's a good question. I've always talked about my lethargy. I am a legend of lethargy. I like taking the most easiest route to any end result, and that's why usually if there's hauling, killing double bass on a song, chances are that's not my idea. That's usually the guitarist saying, hey, play some hauling double bass here. And I don't find, I guess it's just through experience that if you were to get down on yourself for every tiny little mistake you made, chances are nobody else notices those. I mean, people, you got to be a real dick to point out, hey, you just played this hour-and-a-half long show, but you made one tiny mistake. Somebody's got to be a real jerk to come up and mention that. I don't think anybody ever, other than like, say, my friends who know my playing, and they'll come up and go, hey, I caught that. It's like, yeah, you're right. But I remember playing, I was playing with Testament. We were doing this song called The Persecuted Won't Forget, and it's off the Formation of Damnation record, and that was Paul Bostaff playing on that. I remember Paul sitting right behind me as I'm playing this song, and I totally blew it right in front of him. And, I went up to him and was like, hey, Paul, you saw I blew your song. He's like, yeah, but hey, whatever, So I was like, damn, that's the one song I wanted to play well. And God, sure enough, I blew that. But, it's something to have a laugh about and not beat yourself up too badly about it.
Well, I just find it fascinating because I know so many musicians and upcoming mixers and producers too who just live in constant mental torment over mistakes and getting better. And interestingly enough, lots of the guys that I know who have gotten really great at an instrument or production or really anything, of course they challenge themselves and always want to get better, and they don't think that they're the hot shit.
Sure.
Because obviously if they think they're the hot shit, they won't keep getting better. But
absolutely,
one thing that they share is that they don't seem to take it too hard when they have a bad day or blow a performance or something like that. It's just they just don't take it too hard. They just keep going.
That's all you can do. I mean, it's human nature to make a mistake. And gosh, if you do 999 things awesome, but you F one thing up, it's like, gosh, you just did almost 1,000 things right, and you're going to get on yourself for the one thing you did wrong. I do tend to recall those moments more than others, like the bad moments, just because I'm surrounded by so many, where, well, I'm trying to word this so I don't sound like a total egomaniac, but, I do well most of the time, and I will remember at the end of the night, oh yeah, I did blow that, and I fess up to it. A lot of times Eric will come up to me, Eric Peterson will come up to me, he's like, hey, what happened there? I was like, dude, I just gapped. I just totally gapped. And he's like, okay, no, just wondering. But I'll take the blame when I'm doing it, and I also will not take the blame if it's not me. I'll get down on somebody else if they're coming to me going, hey man, what did you do here? It's like, do you realize you fucked that up? It's like, oh, wait a minute, I did? So I stand up for myself, to myself as well. So I guess.
So you just keep it real, basically.
I guess so. If that is the term.
I think so. I think that's what it sounds like to me.
Awesome.
So on the topic of recording, you've been in many different types of situations. I've heard a lot about what it was like recording back in the individual thought pattern days, but
Sure.
Now we live in a whole different world. First of all, just for my dorky self, I want to hear a little bit about recording a death metal record in the early 90s, because to me, I feel like the modern engineers do not understand, like the generation that started engineering in the past 10 years maybe, or 15 years, they do not understand what you guys had to go through.
Fair enough.
To record drums back then. And so I'm wondering if it was more grueling then for you or now.
Oh, I would imagine, neither is that grueling, other than the fact that the drummer he's on the hot plate at first, because the session does not move forward unless the drummer gets his bits done most of the time. And even these days, geez, you can have entire albums recorded, bring the drums in at the very end and just play to the click and everything locks up. I've done that plenty of times, but if it's one of those very organic from the ground up, we're not using clicks, we need you to nail everything on the first, you have 2 days to record 17 tracks or whatever, a day to record 13 tracks, whatever it is. These, I am very fortunate in the fact that I do span both approaches. And back then, you just had to have your parts together. It's like the tape would cost, the 2-inch tape that you're tracking to costs $250 per reel. So it's not like you could do 60 takes of something and just keep hitting delete after each one and all that. But, that's where you had to have your act together in terms of being prepared. And I remember tracking this 8.5 minute long Dark Angel song called The Promise of Agony. And I remember, it was challenging enough to play, I suppose. But at the end of my first take, our engineer came to me, walked right into the studio, right into the drum room, right as I'm done tracking. And I'm like, fuck, I nailed it. That was great. Yeah, one take, badass. And he just had the most dejected look on his face. He's like, man, I'm sorry. The tape ran out with about a minute to go. Uh-huh. And, I had my little freak out, like, how can you let this happen? What the fuck? And I got over it quickly, went in and tracked another one and got it taken care of. But, but just back then you had to perform. And I guess that's where I still have that work ethic involved now. It's like I'm ready to play the song all the way through. I'm ready to do a good job, and I'm ready to make it so you don't have to, create some pattern that I can't play or something along those lines. It's like I'm these days I don't mind comping. I don't mind, I'll play the song 6 or 7 times, but and have you pull, obviously maybe by the third take is a good bed track all the way through, and you want to pull something from take 2 and drop that in there, and pull something from take 6 and drop that in there, the vibe that you're looking for, Mr. Engineer, then, I'm down for that. But I do try to perform everything that's going on the album. It's like, that's me doing it, because I've been under the impression for the past 15 years or so, when everything switched over to digital, it's that even though you might have kick drum stuff going on, the acoustics are going to bleed through. So whether or not that is still true, perhaps gating and things like that preclude that, to make that not happen anymore. It's still my mentality that, I can't just play some kick drum pattern and say, oh, screw that, let's completely change that on the record. No, I would have to play it that way, because that's how I was always told. It's like, we can't really, yes, we could do a few things, move things to the left or the right a little bit, but as for completely replacing a kick drum pattern, that's going to change the whole ambience or the whole, dynamic of the entire kit if all of a sudden we just remove whatever air is being pushed by other drums down into the kick drum mics. Like I say, I could be totally naive on that these days, but that is still a helpful approach to getting songs done the right way. It's like, I'm going to play these songs. I'm not just going to do like some, attempt at a double bass speed, get it kind of close. And then, you guys just fix that later. It's like, no, I'm going to work to get that done because it's my own pride that you might grid these kicks, you might grid these drums, but it's my own pride that is making me play them the way, the way they're going to sound on the record, I guess. So there you go.
I kind of wish that more younger drummers would take that pride too. There's not that many that I've worked with who are willing to get good enough to actually play the parts, but there are a few standouts though.
I can imagine,
like Alex Rudinger is incredible.
I've heard.
Yeah, and Sastry is incredible. There are some in the new generation that are just phenomenal.
Excellent.
But I do feel like that work ethic, those guys aside, I do feel like that work ethic is kind of missing because maybe they grew up in a time where they didn't have to actually play it. And it's not exactly their fault, because if you didn't grow up having to do something, how would you know that you have to do it?
That's fair enough, yeah.
But I do wish it was that way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I try to give all drummers the benefit of the doubt because, I listen to serious liquid metal a lot. You hear a lot of the new bands on that, and you hear these psychotic drums. I try to pay attention to what's happening out there now. I try to be at least have a working knowledge of most of the bands that are out there. And, and I'm like, the cynic in me would want to say, oh, they just Pro Tooled the hell out of this and they just made it happen in the studio. But then I start, the realist in me is like, well, a lot of these young dudes have grown up listening to a lot of guys that are psycho players. So, maybe this younger generation is just killing it when they're 14, when they're 16, when they're 18. I've seen a lot of really talented, very young drummers that, okay, you're going to go places, but you've definitely got skills of a man twice your age. And so that's where I try to go with, rather than just being a cynic, oh, they just Pro Tooled that. That drummer didn't even play that stuff. They just made that in the studio. I know there's a limitation to that. You can't, I don't know. Hell, these days, who knows what you can do? But, I do realize that the skill set is the bar has been raised coming out the chute for a lot of these younger dudes. So I try to give them that benefit of the doubt. It's like, oh man, they probably just studied really hard, played really well, played along to a lot of the psycho drums out there. Like for me, playing along to a Rush song was psychotic when I was 13, but maybe there's somebody else of the newer generation that people look towards. It's like, I want to sound like that guy. And that guy actually did play his stuff. So I got to learn how to play his stuff. Stuff like that, maybe.
It's kind of funny. I feel like drumming, like extreme metal drumming, it had like a renaissance in like 2005 to 2007 or something. Like suddenly, sure. I feel like right in that era, the bar suddenly went crazy, and you had all these drummers that were suddenly playing like insanely fast, like faster than before, and insanely technical stuff. And I remember talking to this one drummer who, I forget what band he was in, but I was sitting side stage and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's like, how are you doing this? And how did you get this good? Like, how, this seems inhuman. And what happened was that he had listened to records where the drums were totally edited and made inhuman through Pro Tools, but he didn't realize that stuff wasn't actually played. He just figured it was real, so he learned it.
And that's the benefit of the doubt that I try to give every young drummer these days, so yes, that's just it. You hear something edited, Pro Tool to shit, and perfect sounding, and you learn that, and that's what I've been assuming is happening. And it's interesting that you were mentioning, that hey, sometimes it happens, a lot of times it doesn't. So
yeah, it goes both ways.
Sure, indeed.
I have a question. So let's just say that you are going to the studio, and so this is something that I want producer listeners to pay attention to. What could you describe what it would be like for you, like a perfect scenario, like what you would expect out of the engineer? Like if you could give us your dream studio experience in terms of how the studio was set up and the engineer behaved, what would that be?
I love a very chilled out engineer. I love an engineer that just has, nothing phases him. Everything just rolls off his back. Like guys like Rob Shallcross and Ulrich Wild come to mind for me in that regard. Super chill. Ulrich does our Death Clock albums and everything Brendan Small related. And he's great to work with because he's like, hey, Gene, you know what you're doing. And you know better than I know your instrument. So it's just my job to capture what you're getting. And so, Ulrich is a big comper as opposed to gridder. And that's helpful for me. And, just one thing that is really helpful from the band itself or whoever I'm doing the project with or the session for is their preparation. Like if you have your songs ready to go, or if they're not ready to go to where you and I can work on them a little bit together, then, and I can have my input on what might be comfortable or not for me to play. If you're asking me to play these psychotically fast double bass patterns, then okay, let me allow me to do what I need to do in order to play those patterns. Put little stops, put little rests. I'm always looking. I could tack on a half hour's nap in one tiny little rest, from my feet and stuff like that. But, if they're prepared with their material, and I've been on both sides of the coin where a lot of times the musician is not prepared. He's in the process of writing these songs. We're doing an album together, and he's got 6 songs together, but 4 of them aren't. So, sometimes they'll leave me alone with the engineers. Like, this song's done. I've tracked, the basic tracks for it. I've tracked the scratch tracks at least. I'm going to let you guys at it while I go back to my place and work on songs, 7 through 10. And, that's fair enough. I can get a lot of songs done that way. And just I've been in every situation of studio where, I've been in the super nice ones and I've been in the super rat's ass ones. And as long as, one thing I like a comfortable place to when I'm not playing drums. So, give me a couch that I can just stretch out on for a minute. And, I like being lazy. I've spent a lot of time making myself comfortable. So if there's a comfortable situation to when there's the downtime that happens when you're recording, computer goes down or, you need to pick up this one little piece of gear. It's got to get delivered really quick before we carry on. Then give me a comfortable place to chill for a minute. And I'm pretty easygoing in the studio, and I used to hate the studio, but now I've learned to just it's a necessary evil, especially these days.
What did you hate about it?
So much pressure on the drummer that we cannot carry this session forward unless the drummer gets his job done right off the bat. And when I was younger, that was a lot of pressure for me, but that's where it's like each album that I did, the red light fever would go away, because I would get red light fever as much as anybody else, especially my early albums. It's like, oh shit, now I'm recording, Jesus. And so I guess as time's gone on, I actually, if I'm really familiar with the material, like say a lot of strapping albums, like we've rehearsed a lot for especially the last 2 or 3 records. So I was really confident with the material. So I would kind of take the kind of Bernard Purdie sort of approach. And it's like, be super cocky because I'm awesome. I'm going to nail this. We're going to kill all these songs. They're going to be great. We're going to get great drums. It's going to be awesome. I would just go, and that would be the only time I would ever let myself get, I guess, cocky.
But that's useful. That's a very useful time to get cocky.
Yeah, if like you're a quarterback, you don't want to go into the game going, oh man, I don't know if I'm good enough to do this. I don't know if I can throw a touchdown pass when we need it. It's like, yes, I can. Give me the ball. I'm ready to do it. I that's the attitude I would take, and that kind of got me over my dread or fear of that red light.
So it was a mental thing for you. It wasn't anything really that the producer said or did. It was an internal battle that you won.
Pretty much. Most producers I've worked with, I don't think I've ever worked with like an absolute dick where it's like, I can't relate to this guy at all. And especially these days, because most engineers, they know who they're bringing in, and they understand that, okay, this guy might have an approach that works for him, and let me just kind of study Gene for a minute and see what works for him, and then try to be amenable to his attitude in the studio. And, oh, hey, he's got a pretty decent attitude in the studio. Okay, this is going to be great. So, I do like an engineer that is forthcoming with the information, like, you're doing a good job, or actually, I need a little more of this. You need to lean into every beat. A little bit of direction is helpful, but I find that a lot of engineers are like, Gene knows what he's doing. Leave him alone. He knows what he's doing. And if that's the approach, it's like, okay, let me take over. But then I don't want to hear any complaints afterwards. It's like, if you're letting me, and I'm a pretty decent self-producer, editor or whatever. It's if I nailed a part, I'll say I nailed that one. And if I didn't, I'll be like, hey, let me do another take. I got a better one in me. I'm pretty decent in that regard. Even though I'm lazy, it's still, you have your own integrity. You don't want to give like, oh, I gave that 80%, but I know they'll fix that in editing later.
Yeah.
No, you want to give 100% because you have to look at yourself in the mirror every morning, and you have to know that, yes, that was me on that record. I did kill it. I did a good job. Whatever they do from here on out with the project is their prerogative, but you laid down the best humanly possible drums you could. So, yay.
One of the, in my opinion, one of the signs of a good producer or a mature producer is knowing when to get out of the artist's way. And
sure.
So there's some artists musicians, same thing, where you should just let them do their thing, because there's a reason that they got hired, and it's because of their thing. But then at the same time, you have to have the confidence as a producer or engineer to know when, even if the guy is really good at doing his own thing, maybe you need to help him out with a suggestion or something, or maybe you need to see the line of when it's okay, when it's helpful to speak up, and when it's not, understand it and walk it. I think that's one of the markers of a good producer. Something that's interesting, and this stuck with me for a while. Did you ever know Shannon Lucas, the old drummer from Black Dahlia Murder?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, we did. He was touring with somebody else.
Yeah, he's been in a few bands.
Yeah, but I know Shannon, absolutely.
He's
big earlobes.
Yes, and he's a big earlobes and phenomenal player. And I
absolutely, he's a great player.
Him on the Battlecross record a few years ago, and
okay,
he's one of those players that insists on it being him and on playing.
Oh, that's great.
All the way through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's the real deal. And he was so badass that I basically just let him do his thing, and then he got kind of mad at me for not pushing him harder. But but I was thinking, like, you don't need to be pushed harder. These takes are incredible. Like, I mean,
great. Yeah, absolutely.
So I've had that backfire on me before, but I still stand by it, not having pushed him harder, because he didn't need it. He was phenomenal.
Yeah, and that's great. That's like you said, that's definitely a fine line, and it sounds like you walked that pretty well. So nice work.
Well, the takes were great, but it's just interesting. One thing that I've found is hard to get over, but important to get over is sometimes I feel like people have to feel like they are doing something productive rather than actually doing something productive, if that makes sense. So maybe we didn't work as hard as we should have because you didn't say anything. But then again, did we really need to say anything if it was already perfect?
No, I hear what you're saying there. Yeah, and absolutely, it's that's a fine line, but it's okay. As long as it is productive, and that's one thing. Like with strapping, every album we recorded, every live show we ever played, I really felt like this is going to change somebody's life. This album will change probably a few people's lives. Our live show, somebody's life is going to be changed tonight. They're going to come up afterwards and go, "Oh my God, I know what I want to do with my life. I know what I want to do with my music." And so if you go into a project with that in mind, that you're going to change lives, it's like that's a lot of responsibility that you put on yourself. But hey, that's just one more challenge to have, and that's why a good musician will push themselves. They want that to be them. They want that to be true representation of where they're at that time. Maybe in 10 years they're going to be way more advanced, but hey, this is the best I have right now, and I'm giving you my absolute best. So that's one way that I've always wanted to just leave a project behind. It's like, hey, I gave you my absolute all, and I'm proud of what I did. So whatever you guys want to do with it, that's your prerogative. But I'm ready to walk on from this, and with my head held high, sort of thing. I don't think I've ever come out of a record where I'm like, oh man, I just botched that entire thing. I don't think so at all. So there you go.
Great. Well, before we wrap up, I've got a few questions here from our audience, if you don't mind answering.
Sure.
them. They were stoked that we brought you on,
cool.
as am I. So here's there's quite a few. I'm looking for ones that we didn't already cover.
Okie doke.
So here's one from Adam Castle, and it's kind of long. What do you look for in a drum tone / sound versus the arrangement of the song and the parts you play? I've always loved Gene's playing and sound, and think his tastefulness is often overlooked for this insane skill and monstrous sound. In many ways, he reminds me of Roger Taylor from Queen, that big beefy sound with real groove and taste and power. Also, Gene is proof that wood beaters are superior.
Darn tootin'. Well, I guess what I look, when it comes to say how the drums are going to be presented on record, I just try to give as much of my tone as I can. Like, we try to tune the drums per project. Like, some projects I tune the drums up a little bit more. Other times, I like them kind of low, and I like that. Roger Taylor has one of the greatest drum sounds ever. Roy Thomas Baker was just an absolute genius with his drum tones. And yeah, I try to achieve the Roger Taylor drum tone. That's very cool that he pointed that out.
No, good ear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the thing because these days with all the sound replacing that goes on, it's like, okay, well, I usually try to have a pretty decent kit. I don't think I've had to sound replace much over time. Perhaps that's something I might not even know about. But if I do sound replace, I try to do the one hits beforehand of my own drums. So give you, a lot of clarity. If you have to replace something, then, at least you've got my own drums to do it with. And I remember the session that I did right before I joined that Testament tour in progress. I remember that kit was not the best sounding kit. They might have sound replaced it, but I did try to tune it as good as possible. The thing I look for these days is clarity more than anything. Like, the tones are going to be whatever they are. I try to give a good tone to tape, but it's a matter of, when it comes down to the mix, that that's where it's really important. And I'm all about the clarity, you know, and sometimes I work in rooms that aren't the largest drum room around, but the engineer knows his room, he knows what to do with it and maximize whatever sonic qualities that tiny closet of a room might have. So I guess when it comes to mixing, I love being involved in mixes. Many times I'm not, but I love it when I am involved because, for instance, something like we used to do with strapping is a lot of I didn't want two kick drums that sounded the exact same. Yes, we did, we multi-layered the triggers on strapping records. Hey, we used the Meshuggah kick from Destroy, Erase, Improve on City. Like Devin actually yoinked the file from Tomas Skogsberg, the engineer, and Tomas Sandstrom, I think, is who we used. Yeah, they were doing a project together, and he was able to find Tomas's Destroy, Erase, Improve kick drum, and he just yoinked it, and that was one of the ones that we blended. We tended to use a blend.
Yoink, that's a good word.
Yeah, so that happened. But one thing we try to do is we try to, I like to detune my right kick from my left kick, even if we're using like triggers and samples and replacements and all that sort of stuff. I still don't I'm not a big fan of that, machine gun, both kicks sound the exact same.
Typewriter.
I'm not super into that. So I know Fear Factory, they had their approach. They like that. And so those kicks were, they wanted the drums to sound like a machine. I understand all that. But if I have my druthers, then I'm all about let's detune the right kick from the left. I like the left one to be, just a semitone higher than the right. So we'll usually take work with the acoustics. And that's why I like to blend the acoustics in, tune them as close as possible, but just let both acoustics have their own dynamics. And so it's not just da 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 da, it's like da 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 da, a little bit of just a little bit of breath and bounce to it. That's one thing we always tried with strapping, and I'm not afraid to take a pulse point right on the top of every bar and just add just the tiniest stick of volume to a pulse somewhere in the middle of all of it. I like doing that, and just to give the drums a little bit more dynamics in this age of digital perfection. Just try to give something a little bit of dynamics. So I mean that was a really cool question, but yeah, I guess the clarity is the most important thing for me. Just I play the drums, you might as well hear them. I'm more concerned with the clarity of them than feel free to back off on the tom tone if that's affecting the clarity, or I like the cymbals to come through, and there's many a time when I'm like, oh man, I'm not really into the cymbal tone that this final product is, but what can you do? There's going to be another record somewhere. We're going to record something somewhere else, so get it right on the next one.
Well, you have a lot of nuance in your playing, so I can imagine that it's frustrating if that gets lost in the mix.
The one thing that gets lost all the time on every one of my records, it never comes. This is something I would love to improve, is the ghost notes that I play on the snare.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, we actually have spent a lot of time showing people how to mix those properly because they get lost. That's the number one thing that the good drummers complain about with mixes. Like when working with them, they always say that on their previous records, that's the one thing that they hate, is that they're all lost or
yes, whatever. Absolutely. And so I've tried to put more of an attack on the ghost notes, but then that's not a ghost note. If you're leveling up your attack of a ghost, then that's not the natural feel that you're getting. The one thing that I try to do is if it's something that's really important to me is because a lot of times if you've got the multi-sampled snare going, I try to stay away from that too, but I understand that engineers will add little nuances to make it the clarity of it, and I get that. A lot of times, if you hit the ghost notes too hard, or you try to ghost note the samples, it just sounds like this digital, just this horrible sound. So it's like, okay, well, maybe anywhere I'm hitting a ghost note, just let the acoustic drum, boost the ghost note in mix on the acoustic drum, and then it'll sound more natural. It just won't sound like a or whatever the ghost note is. It sounds like a little brushy little ghost note. Just raise the volume of it. And these days the guitars are so loud and they're so overdriven and all that sort of stuff that I know going into some projects, like, if you have ghost notes on this, they're not going to come out. And it's like you just give into it and just go, okay, well, maybe if somebody ever catches me playing these songs live, which has happened many times, like with strapping stuff. We lost all ghost notes with strapping, and people would be on the side of the stage watching, especially on those Sounds of the Underground tours and the Ozfest, where you got, a lot of people hanging around behind the set or whatever. They'd be like, I had no idea you were doing all that with your snare, because all I ever hear is just a bap, 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 bap. And it's like, well, indeed, we're not to the point where we know how to get a ghost note through a mix these days, but hey, we're going to work on that.
I'm going to send you, just because I'm going to send you some videos that we've made about that topic, just because there are a lot of the techniques for making them stand out, I feel like, are stuff that just some guys have figured out in the past few months, or past year. Because, it's kind of, if I feel like it's something that engineers should have focused on earlier, because drummers have been complaining about this for years. But I guess a lot of the metal guys, a lot of the metal mixers, their priority has always been the sickest guitar tone, the biggest snare tone, like stuff like that. And then once you get past all these priorities, certain things like ghost notes, just didn't get the attention that they deserved, because they weren't the priority, while there were so many other things that were, I guess, super highly competitive between mix engineers.
Absolutely, I can see that.
They're all fighting for the sickest guitar tone, and they forget the ghost notes. But so yeah, I'll send you a few videos that we've made, because there are some ways to get around it, or to bring them out in the mix more. Just not many guys are doing it, but I think they might start to. So there is hope.
Excellent. Hey, we love that. We love hope.
Yeah, hope does not die today. So here's a question from Sasha Vino, which is, you come from a time where it was more obvious about how to make a living from music. If you rule, you go make an album and you go play some tours, no Instagram, YouTube, Facebook marketing, anything. With all this shifting in our economy, what are the 3 don't do that you would absolutely tell up-and-coming people?
Well, let me start with try this or try that, is to kind of figure out with some of this economy is, I would imagine, I never did this, but I wish I did. I had to learn from the School of Hard Knocks on this one, but, learn how to read a contract. I'm really good with reading legalese now. It's not that challenging, but a lot of times when you get, especially back in the day when your contract was this big, 2-inch thick, dossier or whatever, I taught myself legalese, and it's not all that challenging, but learn how to read what you are about to sign. It's one thing, because back in the day we would hire a lawyer, and I remember Dark Angel had Prince's lawyer, but when he's working with guys like Prince and people of that caliber, the tiny little thrash metal band is not going to get a lot of pouring over their deal. So we signed contracts that lawyers looked over, and we ended up getting screwed. So early on I was like, man, I'm not going to let this happen anymore. So I've learned how to read contracts. That's something to try. Maybe perhaps take a business course, just so you know how to, just even manage your money, I suppose. I never did that either. Never went to college, but I would imagine that couldn't hurt. In this economy these days, it's like, when the file sharing started happening and the illegal downloads and all that, yes, that has changed our economy drastically, our musical economy. I don't think, I think a lot of times that was very young people doing that, taking advantage of the new technology where they could do that. And like, why would I buy this when I can get it for free? Now I can listen to, 1,000 bands as opposed to 10 that I could afford to buy. I understand that's people want the shortest route to pleasure, I suppose. But one thing I don't think anybody thought about is that, okay, guys of my age, my experience, we're feeling that crunch because this is the time when you want to be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You want to be able to record a record, put it out, make a nice living from that album, because that's what we were taught. When I was young, I was taught this is what's going to happen for you. And that really isn't the case anymore. But a lot of the young folks that helped design this path that we are on, now they're in that situation where, hey, at least I got to see some album royalties. I got to sell, 100,000 records of something and make some cash off that. You guys, you could have 100,000 downloads and never see a dime from it. And you got some of the get-in while the get-in was good. Indeed. And now a lot of the young dudes out there, it's like, this is the template that you created for yourselves. I'd love to see how you work yourselves out of this. They're trying with all the social medias and stuff, but that's all great advertisement. But I am not aware enough of social media's impact on income. I'm just learning how to monetize things on social media, on YouTubes and that sort of thing. But, maybe these young kids are becoming masters of that. But it's like, hey, you youngins, you created this for yourselves. You made this bed. And I fortunately have been able to, make some money off some earlier projects, do a little bit here and there, make a little cash here and there. You now don't have that aspect to this available to you. So I know you got to figure out some other way to make some cash. And I didn't do this. You did. So you figure it out, young dudes, like for those who like to steal files and all that, it's like, like, God, I'm in that boat right now. I've got my new DVD that just came out, and the climate has changed. Like, why purchase a physical copy of a DVD when you can go on some torrent site and just watch it, for free? I understand the lethargy involved. I get it. But, there's not some mindless corporation that put up money for this DVD for me to make it and distribute it. It's all my money. I put my own cash into it. I do this so. And it looks great, by the way. Oh, thank you very much. I don't take money from, like, say, my sponsors. I don't have Pearl breathing down my neck saying, hey, you got to do something like this, or Sabian telling me, well, you should do it like this. Not that they necessarily would to begin with, but I X out that possibility by doing it on my own dime. And it is, it is me who either reaps the benefit or suffers from lack of interest in purchasing it. If people can go to a torrent site and download it, then I understand why they would do that. It's like, fuck, I don't want to buy this thing, but I do want to see it, so I'll go find some torrent site and download it. And it never seems to matter to people what they are doing to others with that philosophy. And so, hey, life's tough. Get a helmet. We'll work our way around it. We'll figure it out. These days you record an album, and that's just a demo to be able to go out and play shows, sell merch, You know, that's how you make your money. It's pretty well known these days. That's how you make any money. But even T-shirts, those aren't free. You know, if you want a quality shirt that's going to sell and not just some one-colored rat's ass $6 shirt, you know, you want to have a quality shirt, that's going to cost you too. So where do you get that capital? So it's this kind of like this Ouroboros snake that just keeps eating its own tail, and every once in a while it'll stop chomping on itself enough to let somebody take advantage of some aspect, and we are all figuring that out. There is a new template coming, and I'm not sure what it is, but there's bound to be, you know. So right now, musicians of my ilk, my age, are, you know, we're adapting in the best way we know how, and that's where, okay, you put out this demo, you know, your brand new album that used to be the thing you were looking for, you know, now you just kind of put that out in order to open up the avenues of touring and merch selling, and, you know, that makes it a lot more complicated. You know, if you don't have income from the thing you spend your 6 months working on, and then it's not going to provide an income for you, man, Jesus. Thank you, youngins.
Yeah, that definitely is totally different. That now the album is the advertisement for everything else.
Absolutely. People don't even buy the new records. You know, I mean, obviously the you know, you could put out this killer badass, God, this is us at the top of our game, and people are still like, oh, we just want to hear songs from the first 2 or 3 records. You know, that's when you guys were good. Okay, whatever.
I'm sure you get sick of that one.
Hey, I'm always down, like, especially if it's an album that I performed on. Yeah, I want to play songs off, you know, like the New Testament record. Yeah, I want to play a bunch of songs off the new album. Yeah, I want to play songs off of the you know, the entertaining records. I'm sure, you know, I don't know how the guys feel about, having to trot out, you know, boy, Into the Pit for the 1,000th time, or, you know, Over the Wall, or, you know, Disciples of the Watch, or whatever. But hey, if that's what your fan base is there to hear, and they're still going to buy a T-shirt on the way out, then hey, that's the best you can do, you know.
Totally. Here's one from Mark Vustenhagen, which is, how do you react when the producer asks you to move your cymbals in your setup?
I am very fortunate is that I learned at an early age, keep your cymbals very far away from your toms, so I've never had that issue happen.
Great.
I have a pretty wide, you know, there's a good foot and a half between every cymbal and every tom. So I know a lot of drum kits have, you know, boy, cymbals are right on top of those toms. And I can see where an engineer is going to be like, hey, man, you're getting a lot of bleed. We can't have that. But I that's just my natural initial setup was, okay, cymbals way up high and far away from drums, and I've never had that issue ever happen.
Well, I've always told drummers, man, that when they come in and they want an organic sound with minimal replacement, but then they have their cymbals like an inch off of the toms, it's like, dude, if you actually want what you say you want, you're gonna have to work with me on this and raise those cymbals. You're tying my hands behind my back.
Absolutely, you know. So I've had engineers, you know, look at my setup, come in, we'll look at the setup, and go, oh God, thank God,
yeah.
You know, like, oh cool,
totally,
thank you,
dude. That's the moment you see a drummer set up like that, the feeling that you get is gratitude, pure gratitude.
Awesome.
So here's one from Anthony Zilante, which is, you spoke in Death Clock interviews about fleshing out a song for a day to make it seem like you've spent months refining a song. Do you have any advice about how to keep yourself and your bandmates focused and positive when you're doing these long sessions?
Well, let me clarify that. Fleshing out a Death Clock song in a couple of hours. Like getting a day on a Death Clock song. I'm like, wait, what? When did that ever happen? No, we get a couple hours apiece, you know, because I still have to track the thing over a couple of hours too. So, and we've got another one to do after this. So we got to get a couple songs done at least, you know, and if they're short, then we got to get 3 or 4 done a day. But you know what? That is just a little bit of self, you know, policing. Like if you have just a limited amount of time and and say you're on the clock or something, you got to figure it out. You got to figure out this arrangement. Then I would just suggest surround yourself with musicians that are of like mind, and that's one thing I've told people is find musicians. Maybe they're not the best musicians in town, but if they share your focus, they share your vision, you gotta be with guys in your band that you can hang with. And if you all share the same musical vision, like, yes, we want to achieve something, we are willing to work to do it. This is a job. It's a great job. It's a fun job. It's a very creative job. But if you approach this as a job, like Devin Townsend, he's the master of this, and he's told me back in the day, he's like, well, you figure if this is a job. If you approach this like a job and you spend 10 hours a day at your job, you're going to be successful at it. With Devin and with musicians, sometimes that's a 16-hour day. But yeah. If you approach it like, I'm getting good work done here, and tomorrow I'm going to get up and do more work. That's a helpful attitude to have. And if you have to whip your bandmates into shape by in terms of focus, then I used to have to do that with Dark Angel. I was a real taskmaster. I ran the whole show there for the last couple of years. And, you just try to find people that are willing to self-police their own focus. Like, you find that those musicians that are like, yeah, I want this to work. I want this song to be badass. So, yeah, rather I could be texting my girl for the next half hour, or I could be in here working on this song, or I could be out at the bar next door tossing back a few, or I could be in here working on this song. You want to find the guys that are like, hey, I know when to prioritize, let's work on this song, and then we'll hit the bar afterwards.
Yeah. In my most successful collaborations, and I don't just mean musical, I mean business partners as well, just anything, that's never been an issue. The guys that I've gotten the best results out of life with everyone's always just naturally focused on the task that needed to be completed.
Sure.
It was always my rougher situations where I had to police people, and those tend to be the situations where you don't have as many like minds going for it, so you don't end up with as good of a final outcome, I guess. Absolutely.
I can see where it could only take one tiny question session with yourself of, why am I doing this with these guys? If you have to ask that, then sometimes it's, oh shit, it's already, you've already lost it. It's like, you want that little self moment with yourself to be like, man, I love doing this with these guys. Everybody's, got a good mindset about this, and we're getting stuff done. Yes. So.
Man, I've been on both ends of that. And
sure.
Man, it's so much better when you can have the positive version.
Absolutely. I have too, and I like the positive. Totally.
Yeah, definitely. So here's one from Eric Burt. How and why did you start playing open-handed? What are the benefits you found to playing this way?
Well, the reason I started playing open-handed was merely where my record player was located when I was a kid. It was on, like, say, if you're lying down on your bed staring at the ceiling, it would be on the left side. So as you're sitting on the corner of your bed, up at the top by the headboard, that's where my record player was located. So if you're sitting on your bed playing along with your favorite stuff, playing on your bed, if you notice, like, I'm playing in, like, as you're sitting on the bed, you're playing in the top right corner of the bed. At the top corner is kind of the snare. As you get towards the middle, it goes lower. You got more beef in the center of your bed. So my record player was on the right side of my bed there. So, I'd switch a record, play on it, and the snare sound is kind of the top corner because that's the highest, and the kick drum sound is kind of in the center. And so the center was where my left hand is. The top corner is where my right hand is. So it just made sense. I was born ambidextrous. So, I think everybody's ambidextrous to a large degree, but I do tons of things left-handed, tons of things right-handed, and that's really about it. And when I applied that to the kit, I got told when I was a youngster, I got told by everybody, "Oh, that's wrong. You have to cross over. You can't do it like that. What are you doing?" And all it took was one drummer in town. I grew up in L.A. One L.A. drummer from this really killer band to come over to my house one day. I talked him into come over to my house and playing my drums with me a little bit. And, it was kind of like the only lesson I've ever taken in my life. He took one look at my kit and said, and my style, and he's like, "This is great, man. You could have a mountain of cymbals over here. You could have a mountain of drums over here. What you're doing is awesome." And I'm like, "Thank you." I was like 13 or so at the time, maybe 15 or something. And finally somebody said, "I am not a freak." It's like, this is good what you're doing. And God, I think Billy Cobham plays open-handed, doesn't he? A few drummers have and every time I would see an open-handed drummer, I'd be like, "Oh, neato, cool." So that's really about it. That's why I play open-handed, is just where my record player was located when I was 8.
Interesting. So here's one from Michael Goodrich. Did you ever track down your stolen boots? And if not, did you replace them? And what kind?
They did get tracked down. They were, it was in Santiago, Chile. We flew into the show, and we played the show, and my boots were gone. The whole bag was gone. The whole, had triggers and the trigger module and everything was gone. My whole gear bag was gone. And I should have been concerned with the, $2,000 amounts worth of gear in there. But I was like, "Oh, my boots, shit." But I got a call 3 weeks, or an email actually, I think, 3 weeks later saying, "Hey, this is so-and-so from Luggage Customs down at Santiago Airport. We've got this bag that has your name on it." And, we went back to the airport a few times that day to, "Hey, has the bag come in? Has the bag come in? Bag come in?" And they told us no. But the bag ended up showing up. It sat there in the airport for 3 weeks. They sent it back. I got it back. I used those boots on the latest DVD. I have since had to retire those boots because they, as you could see on the DVD, they are just shot. I started using them 10 years earlier, 12 years earlier with strapping, and they're just shot. I still got them. I got them in the closet. But that weekend I had to end up, the only reason I ever wore boots is just that those are the boots that I wore. I wore those. Those were my shoes. And they started to be in such bad shape that I would have to just wear tennis shoes on the planes or to travel. And then I would pack the boots. And that's the whole reason why I played in the boots. So I didn't have to pack this special pair of drum shoes. And, it's just like, go up on stage and what you wear off stage. That's what I'm down with. So I wear tennis shoes these days. I don't wear as many boots, but, that's why I had to retire those because, I started having to pack them. It's like, this is silly. Just retire them, playing tennis shoes now. So there you go.
There you go. So, man, so many people are asking about working with Devin. They all just want to know. And I guess I do have a question because I've met him a few times and have talked to him, and I've never worked with him. He strikes me as a brilliant dude who can be somewhat unpredictable, but brilliant. And so you kind of got to ride the wave.
Absolutely.
So that's accurate? Those were my... Okay, so in that type of scenario, back to what we were talking about before, you have to be a really good communicator so that, number one, so you keep up, and number two, so that you understand what it is that person wants out of you and expects out of you, and so you can give it to them so that, you can be happy working together. How did you approach communicating with him, and how did you approach the working environment?
Well, I saw how hard he did work. And the Devin that I first met when we first started putting City together was not the same Devin that he evolved into a few years into it. He definitely had a manic quality to him that was very infectious. It was great, and a real, he's 23 when we first got together, and he had this total cocky attitude that I thought was awesome. He had the music to back it up. I thought that was awesome. He had the balls to put in the middle of the City sleeve. It says, "Hey, asshole, fuck you and your shitty music." That's awesome. I love that, and let's put that on a shirt. And, Devin was great to work with. He was always great to work with. And there were times when, you could see where the challenge of strapping on Devin's psyche was starting to get to him, because he really felt like that was an act for him. And he came to us at one point and just said, "Man, I can't do the act anymore. That jerk on stage, saying, being the Don Rickles of metal, it was weighing on him, and we could see it." So when it was time to move on for Dev, I was actually okay with it. It was like, oh man, I see what this is doing to you, and I realized that whatever you're doing with strapping is taking you away from your projects that you do really want to pursue. I understand that. So by the time it was time to move on, I understood. I was okay with it, because I was like, okay, let me put a plan together for myself and what I'm going to do after strapping. We were just starting to make some money. We were just starting to make some headway in the industry. And, Devin, for his own good, had to pull the plug from it. I understood. And I always, even when I was in Dark Angel, my first band, I never thought Dark Angel was going to be my only band I'm ever in. I'm sure I'm going to be in other bands with other musicians. And I just applied that same approach to the end of strapping. It's like, hey, I'm going to concentrate on myself now. Hey, tell you what, I'm going to put out a DVD, see how that works, and I'm going to just move around the industry at my own will. And I'm establishing myself, and I'm established to a degree, but I'm going to establish myself even more. But working with Devin was always killer. He was really easy to work with, and he was never a taskmaster. And I was pretty focused too. I admit my Vancouver era, I did get involved in other things that like I started partying more. I was never that much into that beforehand, but stuff like that, and I've since given that up. But by partying, I just mean drinking more, but
we all have that phase.
Yeah, I had that. I didn't, I never drank when I was in Dark Angel. I was a pretty sober guy. I was a young, focused guy. I was very focused on, like, I want to learn this industry. I want to have an impact on it. I want to survive within it. So, while maybe other guys will go out and, cruise for chicks or spend a lot of time in the bar, I'll be in the back of the bus writing the next Dark Angel record or whatever. And when I was in Vancouver with strapping, there was a lot of downtime, so I joined a lot of Vancouver bands, a lot of kick-ass bands that were all really awesome. But, the one thing, definitely learning, like I mentioned earlier, Devin's work ethic was, hey, if you apply the same attitude that you would if you had a job that you didn't want to get fired from, a job that you wanted to succeed at, you apply this to the music industry, and at the end of the day, you've gotten a lot accomplished on a day-to-day basis. So that's one thing I definitely learned from Devin, and it was great. I apply that these days.
It's so amazing to me that people think of him as this crazy genius, and there is that element to it. Of course, he is an insane genius, but at the same time, none of that would be possible. None of his success would be possible, or the legacy, or he's somewhat legendary at this point. None of that would be possible, in my opinion, unless he did have a sane outlook, a sane and realistic, practical outlook that you look at this like a job, you treat it like a job.
Absolutely. Yeah. If he was truly a drooling, insane guy that, he wouldn't have the work ethic that he did. And, and yes, there is, I I think there used to be not so much an insanity to Devin, but there might have been an unpredictability, and that was, you never knew what Dev was going to say on camera, on microphone, on stage, backstage to somebody that he shouldn't be saying it to. but that was Dev, and it was humorous most of the time. It's nothing. Nobody ever got into super huge trouble because Devin said the wrong thing to the wrong guy or something. Devin would just blurt out. He didn't have a lot of internal monologue going on there, or dialogue, whatever it is. He didn't have the internal off switch. So that was great. It was like, fuck, cool. Somebody who's non-PC and just has an opinion on things and has a strong opinion of himself. I do of me. I recognize that. So hell yeah, let's go. Let's make this happen. I'm ready to go into war with you, buddy. So yeah, we did for a dozen years, and it was great. It was awesome.
Great answer. Here's one and final question, and this is from Robert Dewey Atkins, and it's, what differences and adjustments did you go through playing in so many diverse bands like Death, Fear Factory, Testament, Devin Townsend? Are the roles that much different in each band? And let me add to that, as a musician and also as a team member.
Absolutely, because I do feel like, a lot of people talk about bands are like families or bands are like marriages. I tend to feel like bands are more like teams. And and they say, not everybody can be the quarterback. And I understand that. I'm happy to be the linebacker that goes in and, sacks the quarterback if I have to. But, I'm willing to play roles. I am an alpha male. I am very willing to lead a project, but I am also willing to allow others to lead, the differences in the bands is really the differences in the people that are in each band. And that's one thing I've just learned over the years is how to communicate with folks, and sometimes your opinion is not necessary. You might have a strong opinion about this right now, but you now might not be the best moment to lay that opinion down, know when to speak, know when to shut up. Like your opinion might, although it's a valid opinion and it might help the project, maybe at this moment in time, it won't serve a proper usage to spurt out that opinion right now. But if you catch somebody a little bit later when things are a little bit different, you say, hey, I was thinking about this situation that we're in. What if we were to try this approach? And somebody would be like, hey, that is a good approach. Okay, I wasn't thinking about that earlier, but yeah, that's it. Okay, let's do that. You get it done, And one thing I've learned over the course of years, like, if you want to get like piece of musical idea out, and I did this with Devin many times, and this is a secret I'm letting out, is like, I'll write something and I'll say, dude, I remember this riff, you played it 6 months ago, or this vocal line you sang 3 months ago. And that's always stuck in my head. And you sing it back to them, you play the riff for them, they're like, I did that? Like, yeah. They're like, wow, I like that. But if it's your idea, maybe it's not going to be accepted.
Dude, that is so smart.
I've learned that, and it's merely to help the song. It's I don't care if my riffs are used or my vocal lines are used if it's not going to serve the song. But if it's like, wow, this will really make the song a little bit better if we tried this approach. Hey, dude, you did this. Really? Wow, I kind of like that. But if it's like, hey, man, I got this idea I want to show you right now. Let me sing it for you. Then, sometimes people just kind of clam up. And, so I've learned that. That's pretty good. Try that, kids.
Well, some people, and I feel like they don't mean to be this way, but they just don't take as much interest in an idea if it's not their own.
Absolutely. I understand that.
It's a human nature thing.
I'm the same way, like, especially if it's something that it's a song that I created and it exists in my brain in this way, and somebody else wants to come along and, think they're adding to it. I get the same way. It's like, no, I'm climbing up, I'm closing down, but if somebody were to come to me and say, Gene, you wrote this. I'm like, wow, man, that is a badass idea I wrote. Yeah, cool.
That's clever, dude. Well, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been awesome catching up and talking to you and getting to ask you
appreciate
this
it, man.
stuff.
That's very cool. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's really cool.
And just so you know, we're going to be linking to the DVD in the show notes. So anyone who wants to check out Atomic Clock 2, just go to the podcast show notes, and we've got links to everything Gene Hoglan related there.
Excellent. Wonderful. I appreciate that. HoglanIndustries.com. You could get it in digital form now. You know, it's not just out on DVD, so please do. Absolutely.
The Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast is brought to you by Stam Audio. Stam Audio creates zero-compromise recording gear that is light on the wallet. Only the best components are used, and each one goes through a rigorous testing process with one thing in mind: getting the best sound possible. Go to stamaudio.com for more info. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit urm.academy/podcast and subscribe today.